Robyn Brown's whole brand is that she's the careful one with money, the responsible one, the one who thought ahead while everyone else was apparently spending without a plan. In September 2025, she sat on camera and defended her position in the Coyote Pass property by telling us she just budgets better. That's it. That was her defense. But here's the thing. The paperwork on that property tells a much, much weirder story. And when you lay Robyn's words next to the actual documented timeline of who owned what, who sold for what, and who walked away with what, the picture that forms is not the one she's been painting for 6 years. If this kind of deep dive is what you're here for, hit like, subscribe to SisterWives Crew, and buckle up, because we are going receipt by receipt on this one. Let's start at the beginning, because the beginning matters. Coyote Pass was supposed to be the dream. In 2018, the Brown family purchased roughly 14 acres of land in Flagstaff, Arizona, for approximately $820,000. The pitch, and they said this out loud, on television with cameras rolling, that this land would be the foundation of their plural family. Each wife would have her own home. They would be neighbors. They would build their version of a community together. It was emotional, it was symbolic, and it was expensive. The plan was that all 4 wives would hold stakes in the property, that this was a shared investment in a shared future. That's the version they sold us. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Actually interesting, not television interesting. Because what happened between 2018 and 2022 was not a family building toward a dream. It was a slow fracture. And when the fracture finally went all the way through, the exit terms for each wife looked nothing alike. Christine Brown, who had been part of this family for decades, who had raised children in it, who had invested emotional labor that doesn't show up on any deed, Christine sold her share of Coyote Pass for $10. $10. Now, you might be reading that and thinking there must be context. There's always context. And yes, there was a broader divorce settlement, and yes, Christine walked away with other things, including the sale of her Flagstaff home, which netted her real money. So it's not quite as stark as it sounds on its own. But here's the issue. Robyn's entire narrative in 2025 is that the different outcomes for each wife come down to priorities, to choices, to who was careful and who wasn't. And when you place that narrative next to a $10 buyout, you have to ask, was Christine's departure a reflection of her priorities, or was it a reflection of the leverage she had left at the time she was leaving? Because those are 2 completely different things, and Robyn is very deliberately conflating them. Let's talk about the other wives for a second, because the contrast is important. Meri Brown, who was legally divorced from Kody years earlier in order for him to legally marry Robyn, a transaction that fundamentally changed Meri's legal standing in the family, spent years fighting to have her contributions recognized. There is footage of Meri discussing the split on her Vegas property. There is footage of Meri navigating what she was owed, and it was not a smooth or graceful process. And Janelle Brown, who by most accounts is the most financially practical person in that entire family, eventually pushed to liquidate Coyote Pass altogether. Janelle's position was essentially, this isn't working, let's sell, let's be done. Which, from a pure financial logic standpoint, is arguably the most straightforward reading of the situation. So we have Christine, who left for $10, Meri, who fought for her split publicly, Janelle, who wanted out, and then we have Robyn, who ended up, when the dust settled and the sale reportedly closed, walking away with Kody with a figure in the neighborhood of $750,000, and who is currently, or was recently, associated with a $1.65 million home listing. And the explanation offered for that gap is, she just budgeted better. I want to sit with that for a second, because I think it's easy to let that line slide past you, and I don't want you to let it slide. Budgeting better is a real thing. Delayed gratification is a real thing. Making smarter financial decisions over time compounds into better outcomes. That's basic personal finance. That's not controversial. But budgeting better does not explain why your business partners sold their stakes for $10 while you were sitting in a position that would eventually return hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not a budgeting story. That's a negotiating position story. That's a legal story. That's a who had leverage when story. And Robyn knows the difference between those things. She is clearly not a financially unsophisticated person, which is exactly why the "I just budgeted better" framing is so pointed, because it frames the outcome as a product of her virtue rather than her position. And those are not the same thing. Here is the credibility problem at the center of all of this, and I want to lay it out clearly because it is genuinely a double bind. If Robyn's financial outcome is the result of being a better budgeter, smarter choices, better priorities, more discipline, then why was a $10 buyout from Christine necessary to consolidate her stake in the first place? If the outcome flows naturally from good decisions, the mechanics of how that stake was assembled shouldn't require a $10 transaction to make it work. That's not budgeting. That's maneuvering. But okay, flip it. Maybe the $10 deal was an act of generosity. Maybe Christine wanted out fast, and the family accommodated that.
Maybe the terms were softer than they appear.
If that's the case, if the $10 was compassionate and not transactional, then why is Robyn, in 2025, defending the size of her payout by pointing to her superior financial decision-making? If the outcome was shaped by generosity extended to Christine, you don't then turn around and credit your own discipline for the result. You can have one or the other. You cannot have both. But right now, Robyn's narrative needs both to be true simultaneously, and they don't fit on the same page. Now, let's walk the actual timeline because this is where the receipts get heavy. 2018. The family purchases Coyote Pass for approximately $820,000. At this point, the framing is community, shared future, equal investment. 2022. Christine exits her marriage to Kody. Her share of Coyote Pass is sold for $10. Whether that was her choice, a product of circumstances, or the best deal available to her at that moment, the number is $10.
2024.
Coyote Pass is listed at $1.65 million, not $820,000, not somewhere in the middle, $1.65 million. 2025 into 2026. The sale reportedly closes, and by reporting that has circulated through multiple outlets, Kody and Robyn receive approximately $750,000 from that transaction. So the asset that was purchased as a shared family investment, shared, communal, everyone's dream, ends up returning $750,000 to one couple. And the framing used to explain that outcome is that Robyn just had better priorities. You can understand why people are paying attention to this. You can understand why this isn't just tabloid noise, because what happened to Coyote Pass is essentially the entire SisterWives story in one document trail. What was presented as equal and shared and communal resolved over time into a very unequal distribution, and the person who came out on top is the one explaining the gap by referencing her own virtues. Let me bring in the actual quote because I think it's important to use her words directly rather than paraphrase around them. On the September 22nd, 2025 episode, Robyn said, and I'm quoting here, "You just must have had a different priority of where your money was going to go than I did. That's all." That's all. Now, let me give you some context for what was happening in the lives of the women she was speaking about during the years she was forming her careful priorities and making her disciplined choices. Christine was raising children, eventually leaving a marriage that she described as emotionally unsustaining, funding a divorce, and relocating. Meri was navigating the legal fallout of having voluntarily divorced Kody so Robyn could be legally married to him, a sacrifice with real financial implications she's discussed publicly. Janelle was managing her own housing instability during parts of this period, and, by various accounts, was not sitting in financial comfort.
And Robyn, during those same years, was in the legally married seat,
which is not a small thing. Legal marriage in the United States carries with it a set of protections, rights, and financial implications that simply do not apply to spiritual marriages that have no legal standing. Tax filing status, hospital rights, inheritance, property law, the list is long and it matters enormously. When Robyn became Kody's only legal wife, she gained a layer of protection that none of the other women had. That is not a judgment that is just what the law does, but it is a factor. It is a significant factor. And "I just budgeted better" does not acknowledge it. Not even a little. Here's what I want to propose as a theory, and I will flag this clearly as interpretation rather than documented fact, because I think the difference matters. I don't think Robyn is lying when she talks about being careful with money. I genuinely don't. I think she probably is more financially cautious than some of the others. I think she probably does think carefully about purchases and priorities. But I think she is conflating two things that are genuinely separate: being careful and being protected. Being protected is not the same as being careful. Being protected means the legal and structural environment around you is doing some of the work for you. Being careful means your choices are doing the work. Robyn has been arguably both, but she is only claiming credit for one of them. She is calling protection carefulness, and she is using that reframe to explain why her outcomes look different from the women around her. That is a meaningful sleight of hand. And when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars and a property that was purchased as a shared family dream, it is not a small one. Now, I want to talk about something that I think gets overlooked in conversations about Robyn, and that's the emotional register she uses in different contexts, because it's actually quite revealing if you watch carefully. Robyn is, as anyone who has watched the show knows, someone who cries frequently on camera. And I want to be clear, I am not dismissing that as fake. Emotions on camera can be real even if they're also strategic. The tears don't have to be performance for them to also be effective. But here's what's interesting. Watch the episodes where the conversation shifts specifically to financial matters, to property, to the Coyote Pass timeline, to who owes what and who got what. Watch what happens to Robyn's affect in those moments. It gets crisp. It gets dry. It makes me confident. The vulnerability that shows up when she's talking about her place in the family, or what the other wives said about her, or how Kody's relationships with his children have fractured, that vulnerability largely disappears when the calculator comes out. She is clear. She is precise. She is certain. And she uses phrases like "that's all" at the end of sentences that are doing a lot of very heavy lifting. That contrasts the emotional accessibility in personal conversations. The almost business-like clarity in financial ones tells you something about where her actual confidence lives. It doesn't live in the crying, it lives in the numbers. And the numbers, right now, are very good for Robyn. Let me bring this back to the thematic core of what SisterWives was actually about, because I think we lose the thread sometimes in day-to-day drama. The premise, the one they pitched to TLC, the one they used to justify the cameras, the one Kody sold in every press interview for 15 years, was that plural marriage could work because it was built on a foundation of equal love and shared resources. Not just love, resources. The idea was that a plural family could pool what they had and create something more stable, more communal, more supportive than a nuclear family could manage alone. That was the pitch. Coyote Pass was supposed to be the proof of concept. 14 acres, 4 women, 4 homes, 1 community. The physical embodiment of the thing they'd been describing for a decade on television. What we got instead is a documented timeline in which one wife sold her stake for $10, one wife fought for a fair split on national television, one wife pushed to liquidate because the dream had clearly dissolved, and one wife ended up with approximately $750,000 from a property purchased at $820,000. And that wife is the one who told us the difference comes down to priorities. The resources were not shared equally. The outcomes were not equal. And the person who benefited most from the inequality is the one reframing the gap as a personal virtue story. That's the core moral here. And it's not complicated, it's just uncomfortable to say out loud. Let me also say something briefly about where Robyn's relationships stand in 2026, because I think it matters as a piece of the full picture. Her network at this point is Kody and her children. The other 3 wives, Christine, Meri, and Janelle, communicate with each other. They have maintained connections to each other and to the broader blended family in ways that Robyn and Kody largely have not. Kody's relationships with several of his children from his other marriages have been, by public accounts and the children's own statements, seriously damaged. The family that Coyote Pass was supposed to house does not exist in any functional sense. And Robyn is, by most available evidence, more isolated from that broader family than any of the other women are. So whatever the financial math says she won, and the math says she did very well, the social ledger reads differently. The community that was supposed to be built on that land never got built. The 4 homes never went up. The dream that was sold to everyone, including the audience, including the other wives who invested in it financially and emotionally, it's gone. And Robyn is sitting in a $1.65 million home listing rather than a neighborhood. That's not a character attack. That's just the current geography of the situation. Here's where I land on all of this, and I want to be direct about it. Robyn did not do anything illegal. None of what I've described tonight is a criminal allegation, or even necessarily an ethical violation, depending on how you frame it. People protect their legal standing. People negotiate for their positions. People make choices that benefit themselves and their families. That's human. That's normal. But Robyn is not presenting herself as someone who protected her legal position and negotiated strategically. She is presenting herself as someone who made better choices. She is presenting the outcome as a product of virtue. And that framing is the issue, because it implicitly means the other women's worse outcomes are a product of their worse choices. It means Christine's $10 exit reflects Christine's priorities. It means Meri's legal vulnerability reflects Meri's decisions. It means Janelle's push to liquidate reflects Janelle's failure to think ahead. And none of that holds up when you actually look at the structural factors in play. The "I budgeted better" story needs a world where all 4 wives started from the same position and diverged based on their individual choices. That world does not match the documented reality of what happened in this family. One wife was legally married. One wife had voluntarily surrendered her legal marriage to facilitate that. 2 wives had no legal standing at all. Those are not equal starting positions, and outcomes that flow from unequal positions cannot be fairly explained by pointing to individual virtue. Robyn told us she just budgeted better. The Coyote Pass paperwork tells us what better was actually buying. And look, maybe I'm wrong about some of the interpretations here. Maybe there are documents we haven't seen, deals we don't fully understand, context that changes the picture. I genuinely leave room for that, and I try to distinguish between what's documented and what's theory when I'm putting these together. But the documented facts, the $820,000 purchase, the $10 buyout, the $1.65 million listing, the $750,000 payout, the September 22nd quote, those are the facts. And the facts are enough to make the "I'm just careful with money" defense land very, very strangely. Drop A in the comments if you think Robyn earned every dollar and the math works out fairly. Drop A if you think there's a document in this timeline we haven't fully seen yet, because I think there might be. And subscribe to SisterWives Crew because the next video is going to go through every available public filing on this property. And I want you there when we find what's in there, because based on what we've already found, I don't think we're done yet.